Welcome to Good Grief, the podcast where resilience meets reality. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Malone. In this podcast, we delve deep into the stories of individuals who've triumphed over tragedy, adversity, and trauma. In every episode, we bring you raw and honest narratives from guests who faced life's most challenging moments head on. Through candid conversations, they share their journeys of resilience, shedding light on the strategies, mindset shifts, and support systems that empowered them to rise above their darkest hours. Join us as we explore the profound depths of human resilience and discover how, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and yes, good grief. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this episode today. My guest is Reese, and she is going to talk to us about her experience with her mom who passed away from Alzheimer's. So, Reese, if you'd like to just tell us a bit about yourself and kind of how your relationship with your mom happened when she was diagnosed.
Sure. So I'm Reese Zahner. My pseudonym, I'm a poet that goes by Cleo Childs, because Zahner is a very difficult name to spell and pronounce, as you can probably figure out. But my mom was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's when I was 21, which was incredibly a unique experience for sure. Is going through, I was a junior in college, and she got diagnosed officially during my midterms week. And so I had to kind of go through and navigate this 8-year period or 7-year period of losing her over a long, over a couple of years and watching her decline. And then she passed away suddenly when I was 28 on October 31st of 2021. And so then I went into deep isolation for about 6 months, which I know is probably not a unique situation, but it was one of the first times I had heard of something, but it just made sense. And during that time, I began to write for no other reason. That's the only thing that made me feel better. I'm a person that did this whole, I tried to figure out what I could do to make myself feel better. And the first thing I did was I tried to intellectualize my grief. And so I went through and I watched like anthropological videos about grief and like sociological videos and looked at the psychologist. And I went through and I was like, none of this is making me feel better, but I know a lot about grief now. And then I tried this radical thing, which is just to feel it. And in feeling everything, it became overwhelming a little bit. And so my process of processing all the feelings that I had was through writing. It was the only thing that made myself feel a little bit better. And I got all the feelings kind of from inside of me, outside of me, where I was able to see them, but not only not see them, but to be able to communicate now with my friends and family that asked, like, how are you doing? I couldn't just say I'm fine. I was like, here's a poem about what it feels like to be in my body at this time. And so I went through and I kind of ran to the world after about 6 months, after going through the really hard, not to say that it's still not hard, but the really, deep parts of new grief. And then in December of last year of 2023, I got inspired by songwriting and it just as a hobby picked up and started to write again. And I went to a mentorship session with a record producer in Nashville who I read him a few things and he said, "You're amazing and I'll produce you." And I said, "What?" And I was like, so that was not part of my 2024 bingo card. And I released an album back in May. So about May 15th, which was about my poetry that I wrote when I was going through losing my mother to Alzheimer's and the grief that followed and the peace and acceptance I have now. And I released it with the intention of maybe being able to explain in a new way, which is brutally honest, about what it's like to kind of go through my grief journey and the hope that maybe someone else going through the grief journey can understand and have a new perspective on it and maybe not feel so alone. I think I felt incredibly isolated when I was going through my grief journey, mainly because I couldn't understand. When I was going through after mom had passed, I was in despair and anger and disillusionment with God. I could not understand how people could have peace and acceptance at the end of this, how some people could get to that. And what I did is I released the album and I put the poems that I put in such a way that maybe it could be able to explain the emotional journey of how that shifts over time, kind of like the river of emotions, into having the peace and acceptance that I do now about my mom's death. And that's me.
Yeah. Yes. So because I was slightly confused when you mentioned it, I do want to point out that you reading the poetry is on this album. It's not singing.
Absolutely. I'm not subjecting anyone to my singing voice because that would, no.
Well,
I'm just reciting it.
I love to sing, but nobody else loves to hear me sing. So I hear that, but I'm looking forward to listening to that. And it is available now. We're going to put a link in the podcast notes so people will be able to find it. So if they would like to get a hold of that, they can do so. So tell us a little bit about, like, from the time mom is diagnosed over the course of her illness, kind of some of the changes that happened with your relationship that really were more remarkable to you than others, I guess is how I'd say that.
I have a wonderful, kind, loving mother. She is wonderful and she is kind. When she passed, everyone said how kind she was. Everyone said, and what I think was the most striking thing was to me is that there was a period where she lost her kindness.
Oh.
And I think that it's pretty typical. So like I wrote like a poem that's not on the album, but and I think it kind of explains that. It's called The Lies We Tell Ourselves. And it goes, her teeth are red. I know she's drinking again. I don't need to check to make sure. My conscience makes me do it anyway. Mom, you can't be drinking. But why? The alcohol will mess up your meds. Oh, that's right. I forgot. I know she's telling the truth. I know she's also lying. Who am I to judge her numbing? I can't blame her for trying. I take the travel mug from her. The wine stinks with a metallic aftertaste. She exchanges her gentle voice for a dagger. Why won't you let me have it? I don't have anything anymore. Drowning out her loss in the background, I pour the wine down the drain, watching the red wine stain the snow white sink. I repeat my new daily mantra. She's fine. You're fine. We're fine. I'm fine. I think she became very angry. I completely understand her anger, though. We had to take away her independence. There was a huge fight that we had over going and taking away her keys. And I'm 21, 22, and we have to go. And then she forgets that she has her keys taken away. So then we have this fight constantly for about, I think it was 3 or 4 months, maybe, where she goes, I want to have my keys. I want to go out and I want to go do this thing, which she remembers she can do. But she can't remember is that she is a liability in regards to, and so we go, Mom, you can't go driving. So now, and then she goes, but I want to go driving. So we had to do this. And then she began drinking, right? My mother never drank, but she began drinking as a way of not only coping, but she forgot how much she was drinking. So then and she forgot that it messed up her medication. So then there was a whole, summer period where all these other people are going off and, having fun, going to Europe and going on these internships. And my sister and I, who's younger than I, have to be at home with my mom and having to try to work on someone who is medicating themselves and going through and developing a little bit of dependence and maybe some alcoholism and having to go through and I think that it's so radical of who my mom was. Is my mother was never like that. My mother was kind and gentle. She was a peacekeeper. And to watch this disease be able to kind of change fundamentally who my mom was into the antithesis of herself was incredibly difficult. And then she would ebb and flow back into who she was, but she became kind of like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde a little bit. And it wasn't her, it was the disease. But that became like a really rough thing of having to watch not only the disease take her memory, but also her personality away.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, and it wasn't me that took care of her on a daily basis, but I do remember she was the matriarch of the family. She was the strong one. Mm-hmm. She was the one who ran everything and knew everything. And to see her go from that to not remembering anything was very, very, very difficult for most of us that had spending time with her. That was for sure. So one thing I wanted to talk about, and you and I started talking about before we started recording, was the concept of how people culturally just are not comfortable talking about grief. Now, I know doing this podcast and doing what I do for a living and talking about grief, that it's no surprise to me that a lot of people are very uncomfortable talking about grief. If I tell you, my 98-year-old grandfather passed away in his sleep, that's not usually a bad conversation and nobody gets uncomfortable. When you talk about somebody dying from a disease or something, before their time, I know you said your mom actually was quite young when she passed. And so it's a kind of those things. I know you mentioned that you have kind of some reasons that you have found or theories on why that is. So tell us a bit about those.
Yeah, before I do, I'm friends with a bunch of lawyers. So I'm not an anthropologist. I am not a sociologist. I am not a psychologist. I have a marketing degree, but I am a thinker. And I have about 7 reasons I have to go into them. So the first is the lack, and I picked these up over, when I was intellectualizing my grief. Yes. So, there was something that stuck with those. I think that there's a lack of rituals now. Rituals are incredibly important for processing. What I picked up, and we have a lack of rituals nowadays. And you talk about like the Victorian period, you talk about different cultures that, I believe in the Jewish faith, that there's certain kind of, about 30 minutes or 30 days afterwards, you have rituals, and rituals are really helpful in processing. We've lost a lot of those that we used to have. The lack of a mourning period, right? Being able to say, okay, well, you're in mourning now, or a lack of even the ability to say that culturally, like you have a time to be able to rest and to process, and people are able to recognize that and to give space for that. On top of that, we're living in an instantaneous society where a lot of people are thinking that we need to have everything. It goes so quick. I mean, when my mother passed, I was given 3 days of bereavement leave. Yep. And I was told that that was a lot. And then people are like, oh, how are you doing? And I think people wanted the answer. And when I say, when people ask, how are you doing? I think people mean it genuinely. But I think also people don't want to know the answer. Yeah. What they want is they have an expectation of what that answer, which is you're fine. They want to hear everything's okay. And I think it's because they genuinely want to hear that everything's okay. But I think that there is an expectation over a certain amount of time. If you say I'm not okay, I'm still in pain, then that is seen as, oh, you are taking a little bit too much time, and I'm now worried about how long that you're in grief for. So because we live in an instantaneous society, I think. Fourth is we have a lack of community, in the same way that we used to be very tight knit and we would take care of each other from a community standpoint. People would go around and take, you always hear things about, oh, we need to go take them food. If something has happened, let me go over and have some food or, a potluck but we don't have that really anymore because we're so disparate from each other as living in big cities rather than in small towns. Right. I think also we value doing over being. We are people that like to have action. We like to be able to, our value is seen in what we can do rather than what we can be. And to a grieving person, the most important thing that you can offer is to be with someone, not to do anything for them. And also, going on top of that, we are easily incentivized and we are easily distracted to not feel and instead to numb everything. So if you think about sitting still with yourself, processing, being able to kind of understand and work with the emotions that we have. We're incentivized to not do that. We're incentivized to be distracted all the time. And I think also we have an epidemic of social isolation. So the Surgeon General said that we are more socially isolated than we've ever been before. So you add in on top of that a grieving person, which I think I socially isolated myself from it. And I think too is, I don't know if this is one necessarily, but it's something that I felt, but I imagine other people might feel too, is when I was talking about my grief, I saw, oh, that's the other one. We are told that there are good emotions and there's bad emotions. And the ones that are associated with grief, which are, anger and despair and sadness, are deemed, quote unquote, bad emotions. And the ones that are not to do with grief, which are happy, quote unquote, emotions, which are, joy and friendship and camaraderie. And what people don't want is a person that is constantly talking about the quote unquote bad emotions, because it makes people feel uncomfortable. When I never really talked to anyone about the fact that my mother was dying, for example, when I was 21, because I felt like if I did in the conversation, it was a ball of lead. My emotions and my conversation was a ball of lead, and that I would be passing on this, metaphorical ball of lead to other people. And I wrote in a poem one time, I couldn't figure out how to put it in. The idea is that I walk lighter as I see other people walk heavier, with this emotional conversation, because it's all to do with these emotions. And I think that we don't think, or we are not really in the same way we had beforehand, we can't hold space sometimes for these hard emotions. And we don't know who are the good, trusting people who can actually take those and work and sit with us in that. And so what we do is we have people that it's really hard to find out who are those people that space. And then we have examples where we go and we say, like, I'm grieving and we chose wrong. And this person no longer doesn't have space or knows what to do. And then we feel shame. And then we shut down and we isolate. Yeah. Those are the reasons why I think it's so difficult to be a grieving person that I've kind of come up with.
Yeah, one of the things that comes up in my mind as we're talking about that is kind of the feeling, like, I know in my case, when I would tell people different things about something, every now and again I'd see somebody, kind of well up or really, get all emotional and think, oh,
Mm-hmm.
damn it, I did not mean to do that. I did not mean to do. Then I would feel responsible for you, right? So I'm the
Yes.
one trying to express what I'm going through and what's happening, and now I have to comfort you because you're clearly disturbed by and unhappy with what I have said. So I learned from that. Again, very difficult to find your people that you can talk to about it. But like when people would ask me, for example, my son that passed away, how many children do you have? Well, I have 5 children, including the one that passed away. But if I'm with someone who's maybe not, I'm not getting the vibe that they're going to like it very much if I try to explain that one of my children passed away at the age of 4. I will sometimes stand back and go, oh, I have 4 children, because I know you're going to ask me their ages and where they live and so on and so forth. And I don't want to make you uncomfortable. So it
Yes.
puts on us, the grieving person, the responsibility for the other person's feelings, which is not, I mean, I don't want to make people feel bad, but I also don't want to feel responsible to not be able to say things and that'll make you feel bad. So that's kind of what comes up in my head as you were saying that. It's just that discomfort that people have. And for me, actually, I remember times some of the people I would find the most unlikely candidates would be the ones that were the most comfortable to talk to. So a neighbor or a coworker rather than a sister or my best friend or something like that. So you just don't know where you're going to find your people. That's kind of the thing on that one. So tell us a bit, if you would, like if someone were listening and they are, living in a situation where they've got a loved one who has Alzheimer's or severe dementia or so on, kind of what advice, I guess, would you say to them? What things that they should or shouldn't do, or how to take care of themselves, anything along those lines?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'm going to say is I'm going to do a disclaimer. I think everyone's grief journey is incredibly personal.
Yes.
It's incredibly individualistic. What works for me, and everyone also going through, there might be some commonalities, but I want to say this is what works for me. This may not work for you, but maybe there could be something. And so what I did is I learned how to swallow people whole. Let me explain what that means. My mother, every day I had, there was the best day I was going to have with her. And I learned how to be incredibly present with her, and I learned how to swallow people whole. And now I'm grateful for that lesson, because when I'm with someone, I'm with them. I try to be incredibly present with someone. I would say to be incredibly present with them. I think also what I realized is that there's lightness in this disease. There can be, right? And finding those pockets of joy when they happen. They might not happen very easily, but they happen sometimes. And I remember those, and I bathe in those moments, because I know that those are the moments that I also want to remember. I don't want to remember all the times when I was trying to, she became basically kind of like an alcoholic, and I had to take away the wine. There were also times when we watched Perry Mason together and we laughed, and, we went on walks, and she watched children smiling, and she told me how wonderful her children are. And granted, she didn't know that I was her child, but she talked about me so lovingly. I remember those moments, meaningful moments too. I think one of the things I learned how to do is I babysat for 13 years. And so I worked with children. And when I realized that children really love to be able to feel like they can contribute, granted, their ability to contribute might be much less than an adult, but they still want to be able to do something, and they can do things at a very young age. And so what I did is I kind of took these lessons that I learned with children, and I took them and I put them with my mother at family events where my mom can't really do a lot. She can still go, and if I can coach her, can go set the table and put the forks down next to the dinner plates. And I said, Mom, we're going to go put forks down next to the dinner plates. And she would go and she would do that. Or I said, Mom, can you go, put this aluminum foil over there, for example. And by giving my mom really small tasks that I know that she could do, maybe about a 3 or 4-year-old level, she was able to now feel agency, and that she was contributing to something, and she felt proud, and she felt like she was a part of the family rather than just kind of feeling on the outskirts of it. I think I also learned how to be incredibly patient. And I learned how to be able to say, there are some things that I just, she doesn't know who I am anymore. There are parts where, very early on, about 24, 25, she forgot who I was. And I became a nice lady. And I had to learn how to be okay with being a nice lady. And the way that I showed her love is by being a nice lady that she felt safe with. And so I was just a nice lady that she felt safe with, that would go and talk to her. And the other thing is I would not tried to shame her. I would go and if she said something a couple of times, I would go as if it's the same thing. And the thing is that I learned that there were conversations, for example, how much she loves ice cream. Okay. My mother loved ice cream at some point, and she would go and talk about how much she loved ice cream. And every time I was like, I love ice cream too. Why? Because I did. And I was like, I could talk about ice cream for 6 hours. And I learned how to just have these nice moments and watch her be joyful. And I learned how to kind of just bathe in her and to try to meet her where she's at, not try to shame her, and also not try to tell her that she was wrong or that mom done this a couple times. I know that you like ice cream. I tried to be, I think what I realized with Alzheimer's is that they're in one moment in time, right? And I tried to be in that one moment at time with her as much as I could. And when she liked ice cream, I responded in kind about how I liked ice cream. 5 minutes later, and then it got to 30 minutes later, she liked ice cream at that moment. Well, I like ice cream at that moment. And I learned to kind of walk with her, not recognizing that she knew that there was a path forward or path backward. She was just walking, and I learned how to walk with her at the same speed as much as I had the capability to do so. At some points, I didn't have the capability to walk with her. And what I did is I went and I tried to find a person that could walk with her as best I can. And then I would go take time for myself to be able to recover. And then I would come back. I think that there is no way to take care. If your cup is diminished, then they're going to feel that, and they're going to not, for some, they can understand body language. They can understand tone of voice, and they don't understand the context necessarily, but they understand what's going on. And that is not good for them. So I would try to, if I recognized in myself, right, that I was becoming that, I would step away.
Yeah.
And I would say, I need time, because if not, it's going to send her into a tizzy, in which case it's going to be easy for me to recover from, but emotionally is very difficult for her. And so I started to recognize those.
Yeah, you hit on a point I was definitely planning to ask you about, which is self-care for the person who's caring for who's there. And I think that's very important. If you do get burned out, it's not only not good for you, it isn't good for the person that you're taking care of as well. So I'm glad you brought that up. So before we finish, is there anything else you'd like to share, though? I know we're going to put a link to your poetry album, but anything else you'd like to share to listeners?
What you're going through, if you're going through grief, or going through losing someone with Alzheimer's, it's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult. And sometimes no one talks about how difficult it is. But I think the important thing is, if you're just doing it, you're doing the best you can. And sometimes your best, you feel like it's not. But I think that the level of best, I think it's not even the best that you can. Sometimes the best that you can do is you can wake up one day and you could say, I'm going to stay in bed, right? That is the best that you can do. Okay, I'm doing that thing. Sometimes the best you can do is go for a walk. But honestly, I didn't go for a walk for like 6 months. I just stayed inside. But I think that what I would say is grace.
It's a great word.
Give yourself grace. And when I say by grace, what I mean by grace is recognize what you're doing and what you're going through is hard. There's no rule book. It's individualistic. There are commonalities, but give yourself grace, because that's what I think is needed. And give yourself love and give yourself grace, because what you're doing is hard.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great. Great advice. I would also assume having some sort of support for yourself, whether it's your partner, your friends, whatever it is, someone that you can rely on to support you as well during that journey.
I would say be careful with who those people are, though. Yeah. Meaning that figure out who are those safe people. And I think what I learned is that some people that I love desperately were not safe people that could hold space for me.
Right.
And I recognized that, and I loved them, but I understood. And then I was able to find people that could hold space for me. And I leaned on them for the support. Yeah. And I found out who those people are, and I treasure them. And I think the other thing too is I tell them to this day, it's been 3 years now, thank you. How can I hold space for you? Yeah. If I have the capability to do so.
Right.
And then I learned how to hold space from people. And I think that it's this, I think the last thing I would say, there's no fixing grief.
No.
But I think you can ease the path that someone is on and figure out what people did to maybe help to ease the path that you were on and see if you can be able to pay it forward and maybe figure out how you can help to ease the path that someone else is on. And I think that maybe we could help each other, not fix it, but I think that maybe we could help each other in this grief that we will all experience at some point by being kind, like my mother was, by loving people, and by giving grace to ourselves and to others.
Yes. Do you mind sharing what was your mom's name?
Candace.
Candace. That's a beautiful name. Well, Reese, thank you so much for being my guest today. I absolutely have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I really look forward to hearing your poetry album. Thank
you. I'm not singing on it, so you know, that's a very good thing for everyone.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Good Grief. We hope that stories shared today have inspired and empowered you on your own journey of resilience. If you want to dive deeper into the themes of trauma, tragedy, and survival, be sure to check out my memoir, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival. In this book, I shared my own raw and honest experiences, offering insights and strategies for overcoming life's toughest challenges. You can purchase the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or listen to it on Audible. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful stories to light and spread a message of hope and resilience. Stay tuned for more incredible stories on our next episode. Until then, remember, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and good grief.